Japan's not like the United States. We deal with change day to day. It's part of the reason why we're so with each other all the time, is we're convinced that everything is the end of the world. And so it makes it very easy for us to get a little hyperbolic. But it does mean that when we make changes to our political, our economic, our strategic environment, that they're substantial and they stick. And since we're doing it all the time, when everything's a crisis, nothing is, if that makes sense. Whereas in Japan, everything's about continuity. It's about making sure that everybody is all on the same page, because when they're not, you have civil breakdown. The United States is on a resource-rich continent. We've got a robust local demographic. We've got our closest trading partner, which is next door, which is generally not seen as a rival. None of that is true in Japan. In Japan, you've got a population that is in collapse. Its resources come from more than a continent away. And its primary trading partners, Korea and Japan, are either countries that they don't like at all or countries that they fear/hate. So everything about Japan, they just try to hold the line. And that works in a globalized environment. When you've got the Americans that are making security decisions for you and providing the economic resources in the markets for you, this can hold. And so Japan has not seen significant cultural change since the surrender in 1945. Enter Abe. Abe was convinced that this was an artificial period. He was right. He was convinced that it was coming to an end. He was right. And he was convinced that if Japan did not start making some changes, they were going to be left behind. So the two big policies that he had, one of them he called the three arrows, which was an economic policy to kind of get Japan's economy moving again after 30 years of stagnation. And in that he was called half successful. And the other half was to get the Japanese thinking strategically again. You know, what is a world where the United States is no longer caring about globalization? What's a world where globalization is no longer something we can rely upon for markets and access? And so we got Japanese thinking about the wider world again, and that is something that has absolutely outlived him. We've had modifications to the Japanese constitution, just tweaks here and there to reinterpret what defense force really means. Abe's government went to speak to Donald Trump to basically buy themselves into America's inner circle so that no matter what happens with globalization, the alliance is solid. And Biden's successor has struck off a fairly good follow-on relationship with Joe Biden now. When the Americans think about long-term strategy, we think of Australia and Britain and Canada, maybe Singapore. That's about it. But now we think about Japan too. And so that was just a huge strategic coup. The idea that Japan is now part of the inner circle of American allies. That is no small achievement. No one else has come close to anything like that. The whole idea is to get in with the departing superpower and get into that network so that the Asian network can crash and burn and Japan does not have to overly worry. Anyone who's capable of doing long-term math realizes that China's time is limited. The demographics are so far past terminal that we're now looking in some of the better cases that China will lose half of its population within the next 30 years. That is not an economic model that the Japanese, for economic reasons, want anything to do with, independent of the fact that there's a lot of strategic bad blood between two countries. And so once you take the largest navy, the United States, and the largest economy, the United States, and pair it up with the second largest navy, Japan, and the third largest economy, Japan, a lot of things become possible that weren't possible before, and none of them involve China. You know, I'm an American, so I've got a vested interest in this. Anything that the Chinese do well is something that concerns me a little bit. They have done nothing well for a very long time. The demographic situation is so far past terminal, it's almost comical. And because of that, China is no longer competitive in most mass manufacturing. So even if we weren't looking at a population bomb here, we would be seeing the steady erosion of economic strength out of China regardless. That's assuming that the United States does not take take a military attack. Let me try to phrase that again. That assumes that the Americans do not use the military card to try to mess up China's world, because the Chinese are completely dependent upon American strategic largesse for their economic model. They import raw commodities, they export finished goods. They don't have a navy that can look after those needs. They rely on the United States for that. So the United States could just, instantly crash the Chinese system if it wanted to play that card. And the Chinese, if anything, have gone the opposite direction in antagonizing the United States but not building up the long range capacity that would be necessary to get by without the United States. It's like the dumbest possible way you could do it. And now Xi has concentrated his power so tightly into a cult of personality that he's not even getting reliable information about what's going on in the wider world. So we're just seeing these cavitating failures in policy across the Chinese system. Does that mean that the Chinese people aren't clever? No. Does it not mean that they have become industry leaders in a few things? No. But none of it is sustainable anymore.